This is not what I expected. There were a lot more knives in heads, but not actually in heads, and invincible toy robot armies than I suspected this chapter would contain. But I suppose the narrative fog in Hunter x Hunter is just so thick that you can't accurately peer into the next chapter, or even the next page of the current chapter. Invincible toy robots can pop up at any time. And we really have a lot of cool Nen abilities in this chapter, more so than you may have registered. Because we focus in heavily on 2 new abilities, but there are actually 4. Before stepping into that though, chapter 399 picks up in the Sinister Saw Room, where we get a bit more of that Togashi trademark characters showing their working out. There's about 2 pages of speculation between Nobunaga and Henry regarding what's actually happening. Nobunaga suspects that the victims they forced through the doorway were actually potentially in league with the Heili family, but we know that to not be true because the Heili family, they don't really associate with any non-Heilesians. In fact, hilariously, it's much more likely that the people that the troop fed into the Heili were members of the other mafia families or associates. But what this all builds up to is a very nice bro moment between Nobunaga and Henry, with the former lamenting his potential mistake and therefore walking into an even worse trap than suspected. However, Henry's just like, bro, no, that was not your mistake. In fact, it probably wasn't even a mistake at all. And it's just such a weird dynamic to have popped out of nowhere. In the space of a few minutes, these two have formed a fully functional friendship. To something more sinister though, this isn't actually featured in the chapter, but the author comment in Weekly Shonen Jump by Togashi's assistant made me took a little bit of a closer look at the dissection room, because the assistant stated that when they actually decided what was going to be on that page, he felt quite ill and uncomfortable, which I'm betting all has to do with the washing machine tumbling away there, with that like very ominous dark liquid that is almost certainly blood. And the washing machine itself might even be a function of someone's ability to dispose of all of the leftover meat. Although funnily enough, it does actually seem to clean clothing, because there's a drying rack to the side with all sorts of very pristine shirts and pants all nicely pressed and ready for wearing, which I assume were from the Heili victims. But it's a strange and disturbing room, and I'm really glad that we didn't spend a lot of time there. And where we ended up was certainly less than expected. This was a very solid atmospheric flip by Togashi, setting up this dirty, bloodied, sinister environment, only for us ultimately to end up in a brightly lit family room with a bunch of people just sitting, chilling, hanging, whatever it is that the people do together. With that said, I was still very much on guard at first. The 180 flip just had me thinking that this whole thing was a Heili trap and they were putting on an act. And I don't think I can be blamed for thinking that way, especially with all of the theatrical and performative language that's been used across the last 2 chapters. Like, there was a lot of talk in 398 about setting up a Nen stage. And in this one, the Heili family were having a discussion about music performers and band dynamics on stage, which seemed a bit random, like we were listening in on co-workers just desperately trying to fill time on break. I will say that this conversation is anything but random. And I don't think this is intentional on the part of the characters, but what they're talking about here is almost certainly Togashi's allegory for the Heili family itself. Because there's a lot of debate about whether it's more important to be different and unique, or whether it's more important to act as a cohesive group, to blend together and homogenize, which is exactly what's happening within the family right now. You have certain members going down the path of wanting to be different and doing their own thing, whilst others are prioritizing the, well, for lack of a better term, family dynamic. With the metaphor being that they are the musical performers and the set list of songs are their Nen abilities. And Terebellum's view in particular is quite interesting, preferring the group before it has this established style, and also not wanting others to barge in, which could be a reference to Nobunaga and Henry in the current situation, or potentially even Morena's plans to recruit new members. But it was so one for one that I thought that the Heili family were actually speaking in code for a second, like registering that yes, other people are listening, so we're gonna continue our strategic conversation just, in some code. Yeah, I really didn't say that right, but I am not re-recording it. However, I think I gave the Heili family far too much credit. As the chapter unfolded, I think it's pretty evident that there was no real plan or trap in place to deal with Nobunaga and Henry, at least not from this particular pod of Heili members. They were very much just legitimately hanging out in the base, filled with confidence that their defense systems were nigh on perfect, which is a very unearned confidence. What happened in this chapter was probably the best case scenario for everyone involved. Nobunaga and Henry, they got some information, deposited the transmitter, and then even returned unscathed. Meanwhile, the Heili family got extraordinarily lucky that the people who came after them had these extraordinarily straightforward abilities that they could kind of improvise around. Because there are a lot of other troop members who would have felt a bit dirty after all of this Hisoka searching and just decided to take a Heili bloodbath. And I think it shows that this family is still far too ignorant of the world of Nen. Because even with their pretty damn cool and in one case insane Nen ability. What happened here was essentially two groups playing rock, paper, scissors and resulting in a draw. By the way, I just want you to know how much it pains me to say rock, paper, scissors. In Australia, we say scissors, paper, rock, but I can't say that because then the comments get flooded with Americans going rah, rah, rah. You know what you all sound like. Our first new Nen ability of the chapter is rather delightfully called Sweet Home, and it belongs to Terabellum. It's a very cool power actually, I like it a lot, and it transfers damage taken by Terabellum to anything being touched by his left hand, and I think it was superbly aesthetically introduced with fantastic artwork of the knife in the head. In addition to that, he can also straight up transfer the damage of others by touching them with his right hand and transferring the damage again through the object in his left hand. Object or person? Person as well. I imagine this could work out very terribly for someone, but both hands need to be making contact with their respective targets at the time of impact. So it's a power that can make you practically invulnerable, but it is very, very finicky to use. And it also seems to operate with a similar principle to Vaconte's door power, which makes sense because both Vaconte and Terabellum are emitters. But one way you can think about it is that Terabellum does what Vaconte does, except that Terabellum transports damage to a new location. Overall, it's the same general principle of teleportation, just applied in a different way. And part of a now trend with the Haley family, considering that Luini was also an emitter who found an ability based in teleportation. It's almost like whoever developed the teleportation power first set a trend, and then the other Haley emitters put their own unique spin on it. Because up until this point, we've only rarely seen emission used in this sort of way. Two examples I could think of off the top of my head would be Nolv's hide and seek, obviously. Nolv is an emitter. And also Leorio's remote punch. That operates on a similar principle, I suppose. But again, they are rare cases of emission being used in this way. And now we have this sudden huge concentration of emissive teleportation. Sort of like a niche cultural development. But Sweet Home in particular does give us some fascinating insight into the personality of Terabellum. This is definitely not the sort of power I'd expected of him, given his background as a hitman. And especially combining that with a mission, I would have thought that he would have developed a much more offensive Hatsu. But it looks like his innate nature is more one of self-preservation, but also showing that, yeah, he does have a genuine care for those around him, to some degree at least. Terabellum isn't the selfish kind of, yeah, it's all for me and none for not me kind of guy that we're kind of used to with the Haley family, because that's what Luini and... forget the other guy's name, the guy who turned his arm into weapons and then died. It just doesn't matter anymore. But it looks like there's a lot more going on with Terabellum, and I'm quite pleased by that. And this goes even further with Yokotani, who has one of my favorite Nen abilities introduced in this entire arc, called LSDF, Most Attack. And there's a bit to break down here. The LSDF acronym is likely a reference to the JSDF, the Japan Special Defense Forces. I suppose in this case the L might stand for legal, but also probably not, because I don't tend to assume that Togashi is invoking English. Meanwhile, Most refers to the philosophy that a person should care equally for all regardless of relationship, even if that relationship is one of hostility, hence why this whole event was resolved quite peacefully. But this Hatsu has everything I love about Nen, which is simple idea plus complex conditions equals ridiculously specific and odd power. And I should say that I've seen some people complaining about how easily Nobunaga was dealt with by Yokotani, but let me tell you, the Ant King Meruem himself would not have been able to destroy these Nen guards if he met their conditions, just like how he wasn't able to destroy Knuckles' APR. Speaking of, Knuckle and Yokotani's powers are quite similar to one another, because both prefer the path of pacifism. These abilities are crafted with the idea of an invincible Nen beast that deals with opponents without causing them any physical harm. With that said, Yokotani's ability is in a whole league of its own, and it's because of the gazillion restrictions required to actually use it. In order to summon and wield these here jolly bad boys, Yokotani himself needs to be within the Haley base, as does Morena, which is a big problem, because it's never a good idea to tie your personal Nen ability to a completely separate individual. Yokotani also needs to introduce himself, meaning that a particularly bloodthirsty opponent could have the opportunity to kill him before the ability activates. And in addition to that, the target needs to have committed a crime before the guards will actually do anything. So if you're keeping score, that is 4 conditions that Yokotani needs to meet before anything happens, which is the same number of conditions that Chrollo needs to satisfy to use Skill Hunter. So it's an unusually complex power for an amateur, to the point where I highly doubt that this was developed by Yokotani in isolation. I suspect that Morena had a very strong hand in guiding Yokotani to this solution. Here's a scary thing though, the potential of this ability has really only just begun to be explored. The last time we were updated, Yokotani was a level 27, meaning that we have at least another 73 levels of potential development available for what is already a pretty damn ridiculous power when used correctly, which so far it is, for the most part. I mean, it's very difficult to actually attack Yokotani before he introduces distances himself because you can't step through the doorway without being teleported back to the original room, which is where Henry and Nobunaga are sent back to at the end. Meanwhile, projectile attacks can work, but not while Terebellum is there to absorb them, so it's quite tricky for more precise Nen users. I suppose what you would need is someone with just a much more explosively packed projectile power. We also receive a glimpse into the powers of two more Haley members, one of which is Orage, who blocks a knife with a copy of Weekly Shonen Jump, which is the magazine Hunter x Hunter is published in, and I'm not sure, but this might be Luffy from One Piece on the cover. That might just be my eyes and my own fictional pirate personal bias, but what I see right there is a rubber man with a straw hat behind him. And on another note, I can't believe that I'm starting to seriously learn the names of all of these guys. But Orage's affinity is currently unknown. He could just be using basic enhancement on the magazine to block the knife. Although, to be honest, I think a copy of Weekly Shonen Jump is so thick with so many C's that it could just block any knife without Nen. But the reason why the jump was used was for the much more intriguing character of Perigord, who wanted to purposely get hit by the knife in order to activate his own ability. Again, with Perigord, we have yet to discover his Nen affinity. In fact, the last time we checked, he was only a level 18, which means he's killed at least 3 more people between now and then to level up to the point where he actually has an ability. Ailey family have been busy, and it seems to be implied that he has some sort of healing powers because he wants to test himself damage-wise. But the much more shinier nugget here is Perigord's designation as the Organ. Marena has chosen him for this seemingly important role, and if I had to guess right now, it may be a condition for a larger ability. Say in order to maintain the Nen structure of the hideout, one person needs to be designated as the key organ, which Perigord would be quite suited to if he does have a healing ability. But then again, it also might be a Phantom Troop style situation. A metaphorical designation of, yes, you are the organ, you are the muscles, I am the head, it's something organizational like that. But probably not. I think it has more to do with magic powers. But again, I think this chapter worked out far better than Nobunaga and Henry could have hoped for. They now have information, they have a tracking device at the actual physical location of the base, and in addition to all of that, they are both perfectly safe. The only issue is that Nobunaga had his katana confiscated, which interestingly enough, needing to retrieve his sword is how we got into this whole mafia mess to begin with. I don't think that he's defenseless, or more importantly, attackless without it, but if it wasn't important, then he probably wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to retrieve it in the first place. So as much as I did breathe a sigh of relief at the end, Nobunaga does still feel a little bit vulnerable right now, because being at anything less than 100% could be a potential death sentence when trapped on a ship populated by an increasingly powerful Nen mafia, a devastating set of Nen princes, and of course when one is being specifically targeted by the illustrious murder clown himself.